Hey, Larry. Today we're going to talk about the idea of mixing purely analog versus mixing in the box or a hybrid approach. We've had so many conversations about this, and you have this beautiful Rupert Neve Designs 5088 console in the other room, but I know you do a lot of mixing in the box as well.
Yeah, a lot. More than the console, for sure. I mean, my path has been, when I opened the studio in 1997, it was a 16-track, 2-inch bass studio. So we had a 16-track tape deck, console, and so guess what? Everything was mixed on the console and analog, right?
Right.
You know, we'd mix to DAT, which is digital, but there was no manipulation to be done within a DAT machine.
Sure.
Unlike a Pro Tools or a computer, DAW stuff. So as time went by, I started, utilizing Pro Tools initially actually just as something to mix into instead of a DAT machine because they were highly unreliable. And then I could also edit the mixes. I could mix in pieces and chop them together. I thought, this is great. Then we got to the point where mixing in the box was actually better than the console we used to have prior to the Rupert Neve Designs console. So that was interesting. And Kendra Lynn, my studio manager, for many, many years, decades, she was like, I'm getting cleaner, better mixes in the box. What are we going to do? And that's when you have to start thinking about all of this, right? Because, there's summing, which I know you do some,
yep.
and you've got a small console and stuff too, right? Or is that a small console or is it a big one?
I have a big console and a small console,
okay.
Right? Yeah.
Console collector.
Yeah.
So we had this previous console. I don't want to throw them under the bus because they totally make different products now.
Right.
And but it was from the 80s, and it was just not performing up to par. It was kind of noisy. And I thought, okay, a console, if I'm going to do something, and some of this is based on John Bacigalupi, our publisher partner in Tape Op. His advice was like, don't just get something that works, get something that's like kind of iconic to a degree, because that'll be sort of your studio centerpiece.
Right. And
they'd shown me that picture of the console. They showed me schematics of it. Josh Thomas had shown me that. I was like, this is going to be great. It's 45 volt rails plus and minus. Right. It's crazy. So I was like, okay. Then I started, thinking, well, how do I mix? And I initially mixed everything on the console all the time. So it would be in Pro Tools sessions, some sessions still on tape, very rarely now though. But I would mix Pro Tools into the console, back into Pro Tools. And I love that. I think that'd be my preferred way to always work. But your real disadvantages of every type of thing are how we interface with our client, not so much how things sound. So there are many junctures in this where we can say, I could have better sound. I could have better sound, but I need to provide 300 revisions, So you have to make some compromise. I think you're always making compromises in the recording studio and recording music.
Yeah.
So for me, I just started offering different tiers. And I think this makes sense that you could say fully in the box mixing, which I've really finally adapted to a way that I find is pretty close to my analog mixing.
Yep.
And then sort of different tiers of console-based mixing, like attended, unattended, etc., by the song, remotely, things like that. So, I came up with a system that works. I do think there's times where maybe it could be more beneficial to go and mix something in the analog realm or do some processing and bring it back in. But honestly, I'm offering some $250 mixes. I don't really have the time to come down here and print things.
Yep.
The studio might be booked up with other clients.
Yep.
So I'm mixing, back and forth between my home studio and this studio. And so that flexibility of it being completely in the box is great. And, I think I wasn't great at it initially, but I think you can get better at it. And I think you start to adapt it to work for you. I wish that if I owned just a studio that I was the only one that was in, like with what you have, I would have a different process. I bet you 100%.
But it's the same idea in that people are going to want revisions. And even with the flexibility that leaving my studio set up almost all the time, the way, I mean, my I/O remains the same to certain pieces of outboard gear.
Right.
But I find myself mixing more in a hybrid way, where I do use a summing mixer, or I am using the console, but I am still
bringing it back into the box.
I'm recording back into Pro Tools, of course. I'm not printing to tape, but because those things can remain constant, and output 8 is always bass, and it's always, I have things going to, maybe it's a distressor, maybe it's an optical compressor.
Channel.
Sure, and it is very flexible in that regard. But rather than having to recall a whole console mix, and my consoles don't have automation on them.
Yeah, mine doesn't either.
Right. Yeah. So that does, provide challenges in terms of if a client does want a lot of different revisions and changes and mixes.
Yeah.
And it gets into we can have another conversation in another segment about mixing from stems, providing stems, and the flexibility that.
We definitely should, because that could be another 30 minutes.
But yeah, we have Andrew Sheps and Chad Blake, who were once, diehard console users, now mixing exclusively in the box. And I think it's really about who is doing the mix and what their aesthetic and their ears and their instincts are.
Chad and Andrew were both really big inspirations for me to kind of move further into that mixing in the box realm, because I've met them both, I've hung out with them both, I've interviewed them both. They're fantastic.
Yeah.
And their work is fantastic. So that's like, okay, that means to me that the recording equipment is not what's, holding you back.
Yeah.
And it's like, and it's not even like not having a certain plug-in or any of that kind of bullshit. It's like, it's yourself, and you need to work harder, and you need to be better at what you're doing.
Yeah, and the way that we work today is that I do start mixes at home often. If I can start a mix at home on my couch.
Oh yeah.
And then take it to the studio, and I can run it through other gear. And so it just provides a lot of different flexibility, and I think there is no right or wrong way to do it.
Hey, at the end of the day, if that client is really happy and loves that you helped make something sound better to their ears as well, then we're all happy.
Yeah, exactly.